The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the crystal halls of Nexus Prime with an urgency that hadn't been seen in over 2 centuries. Representatives from 47 species filled the vast chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, harmonics, and electromagnetic pulses that the universal translator struggled to keep pace with. Ambassador Thexani of the Hegemony Coalition rose from her seat, her 4 arms gesturing in the formal patterns that demanded immediate attention. The crystalline being's voice resonated through the chamber with the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire star systems. Fellow counselors, we gather today to address the growing threat that has emerged from the Outer Rim territories. The species known as humans has demonstrated capabilities that far exceed their technological development timeline. In the past 50 standard cycles, they have expanded from a single world to controlling 17 systems. Their military prowess, adaptability, and, most concerning of all, their unpredictable nature pose a significant risk to galactic stability. A wave of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell, pulsed with agitation. Their expansion rate violates every known principle of sustainable galactic development. Most species require millennia to achieve what they have accomplished in mere decades. From the elevated platform reserved for the ancient architects, a voice echoed with the weight of eons. We have observed this species since their first primitive radio transmissions. They possess an unusual combination of creativity and destructiveness that makes them unpredictable variables in galactic equations. Admiral Kethmore of the Stellar Defense Initiative, a massive insectoid being whose species had maintained peace for over 1,000 years, clicked his mandibles in frustration. Their military tactics defy conventional wisdom. In the border skirmishes of Sector 7, a single human fleet defeated forces 3 times their size using strategies our war computers deemed impossible. The human representative, Ambassador Sarah Chun, sat quietly in the designated section for newer species. Her simple blue diplomatic uniform stood out starkly against the elaborate ceremonial garments and natural forms of the other delegates. She had requested permission to speak 3 times, but each request had been formally denied by the session chair. Counselor Vexhai, whose species had achieved spaceflight when humans were still developing agriculture, projected holographic displays above the chamber. Observe these tactical analyses. Human forces consistently achieve victory ratios that our mathematical models suggest should be statistically impossible. They adapt to new technologies and situations at rates that suggest either genetic enhancement or access to technology beyond their apparent development level. The displays showed battle after battle where human forces had faced overwhelming odds. At the siege of Kepler Station, 3 human destroyers had held off an entire pirate armada for 6 days until reinforcements arrived. During the merchant route crisis, human negotiators had ended a trade war that had been burning for decades, using diplomatic approaches that none of the involved species had considered possible. Perhaps most concerning, continued Vexhai, is their expansion into territories that other species have deemed too dangerous or difficult to colonize. They have established thriving colonies in asteroid fields, on worlds with extreme weather patterns, and even in the debris fields of ancient battlefields that we had written off as uninhabitable. Ambassador Texanye nodded gravely. Their adaptability extends beyond mere survival. They have taken technologies from dozens of species and improved upon them in ways the original creators never imagined. The plasma shielding system they developed for their ships is now 30% more efficient than the original Zephyrian design it was based upon. A chorus of electronic harmonics from the Resonance Collective added their concerns. Their cultural integration patterns are equally troubling. They do not simply adopt the customs and technologies of other species. They synthesize them, creating hybrid approaches that often prove superior to the original methods. This suggests a level of cognitive flexibility that could destabilize established galactic order. The session continued for hours, with representative after representative presenting evidence of humanity's unusual capabilities. The Traders Guild reported that human merchants had revolutionized several trade routes by finding efficiencies that had escaped notice for centuries. The scientific consortium noted that human researchers had made breakthrough discoveries in fields that had been stagnant for decades. Dr. Quintal of the Medical Alliance, a tall, slender being whose species had mastered biological sciences millennia ago, presented perhaps the most unsettling evidence. Human medical personnel have demonstrated an intuitive understanding of alien physiology that our own experts find remarkable. During the plague outbreak on Vega 7, human doctors developed treatment protocols for species they had never encountered before, achieving cure rates higher than our own specialists. The weight of evidence continued to mount. Human engineers had solved infrastructure problems that had plagued older civilizations for generations. Human artists had created works that resonated across species barriers in ways previously thought impossible. Human soldiers had demonstrated tactical thinking that had revolutionized military doctrine throughout the galaxy. As the day progressed, the tone in the chamber grew increasingly somber. What had begun as a discussion of an emerging threat was revealing something far more complex and potentially dangerous to the established order. Ambassador Chun finally stood, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the lack of amplification. Honored counselors, I respectfully request permission to address these concerns directly. The chamber fell silent. Fexani's crystalline features reflected the chamber's lights as she considered the request. The accused species will be permitted to speak, though this session is primarily intended for established council members to evaluate the situation. Chun stepped forward, her posture confident despite being surrounded by beings whose species had achieved interstellar civilization when her ancestors were still hunter-gatherers. I understand the concerns that have been raised today. Humanity's rapid development and expansion must seem alarming from the perspective of species that have followed more traditional development patterns. She gestured to the displays, still showing tactical analyses. But I would like to provide context that may have been overlooked in these evaluations. Humanity's approach to challenges has always been shaped by our world's unique characteristics. Earth is a remarkably dangerous planet by galactic standards. We evolved alongside predators, natural disasters, and resource scarcities that forced us to develop rapid adaptation as a survival mechanism. The chamber listened with the polite attention typically accorded to species defending themselves, but Chun could sense the skepticism in the various forms of body language and energy patterns around her. Our military successes, our technological innovations, our cultural adaptability, these are not the products of some hidden agenda or secret enhancement program. They're the natural result of a species that learned to survive by finding new solutions to impossible problems. Admiral Kethmore's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Ambassador Chun, your explanation, while interesting, does not address the core concern. Regardless of the source of your species' capabilities, the fact remains that humanity represents an unpredictable and potentially destabilizing force in galactic affairs. Chun nodded respectfully. I understand the Admiral's concern, but I would ask the Council to consider whether the solution to unpredictability is suppression or whether it might be integration. Humanity has consistently sought to contribute to galactic civilization, not to dominate or destabilize it. The architect's voice resonated through the chamber once more. The young species speaks of contribution, yet their very nature challenges the established patterns that have maintained galactic peace for millennia. Change, even positive change, can be destabilizing when it occurs too rapidly. As the session drew toward its conclusion, the mood in the chamber had crystallized around a single, troubling consensus. Humanity's capabilities, regardless of their source or intent, represented too great a deviation from established norms to be safely integrated into galactic civilization without careful control. The vote, when it came, was not unexpected. By a margin of 38-9, The Galactic Council passed Resolution 2847. The species designated as human shall be classified as a Category 4 galactic threat, subject to immediate containment protocols and supervised development guidelines. Ambassador Chen listened to the formal reading of the resolution with carefully controlled emotions. The classification meant that humanity would be restricted to their current 17 systems, subjected to regular monitoring, and required to submit all technological and military development for council approval before implementation. As the session adjourned and the various delegates began to file out of the chamber, Chen remained seated, reviewing the formal documentation on her tablet. The resolution was comprehensive, effectively placing humanity under a form of galactic house arrest, disguised as protective oversight. She was so absorbed in reading the fine print of their new restrictions that she almost missed the soft chime of her emergency communicator. The message that appeared on the screen was brief but urgent. Priority Alpha transmission from Deep Space Monitoring Station Bravo 7. Unidentified massive vessel detected in Sector 12. Trajectory toward inhabited systems. All available assets requested for immediate response. Chen looked up at the emptying chamber, where the delegates were still discussing the wisdom of their decision to contain humanity. None of them had received the alert yet. Human communication networks were often faster than the official galactic channels, another small advantage that had contributed to their perceived threat level. The irony was not lost on her. On the very day that humanity had been declared too dangerous to participate freely in galactic affairs, they were about to be called upon to help defend those same affairs against an unknown threat. She closed her tablet and walked toward the exit, her mind already shifting to the practical implications of the message. Within hours, she knew, the same council members who had just voted to restrict humanity would likely be asking for human assistance in dealing with whatever was approaching Sector 12. The crystal halls of Nexus Prime echoed with the sounds of formal diplomatic farewells as Chun made her way to the communication center. She had urgent calls to make and very little time to make them. Behind her, the chamber that had just declared humanity a threat to galactic stability stood empty, its crystal walls reflecting the light of stars whose safety might soon depend on the very species they had chosen to contain. As Chun reached the communication center and began placing calls to Earth and the human fleet commands, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the galaxy to realize that some threats were too large for established protocols to handle, and that sometimes the most dangerous allies were also the most necessary ones. The emergency alert continued to pulse on her tablet, its simple message carrying implications that would soon test every assumption the Galactic Council had made about threat assessment, species classification, and the true meaning of galactic security. In the depths of space, something vast and unknown continued its approach toward the civilized systems, indifferent to the political classifications and bureaucratic restrictions that had just been placed on the only species that might be unconventional enough to stop it. The distress signal reached the human monitoring stations 47 minutes before it appeared on any galactic network. Deep Space Station Prometheus, orbiting the edge of human space, detected the transmission's unique quantum signature and immediately flagged it as a priority alert. Captain Marcus Rivera was reviewing the morning tactical reports when his communications officer burst into his ready room without the courtesy of requesting permission to enter. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim said, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled urgency. "We're receiving a distress signal from something that shouldn't exist." Rivera followed Kim to the command center, where the main display showed a cascade of incoming data that made no immediate sense. The quantum signature was massive, indicating a vessel larger than anything in the current galactic fleet registries. More troubling was the energy pattern analysis, which suggested technology that predated current galactic civilization by several thousand years. "How far out?" Rivera asked, his mind already shifting into the tactical assessment mode that had served him well during the border conflicts. Approximately 18 hours at maximum burn, Kim replied. But sir, there's more. The signal isn't just a distress call. It's actively broadcasting historical data, tactical information, and what appears to be a complete crew manifest. The main screen shifted to display the transmitted information. Rivera read the data with growing amazement and concern. The vessel identified itself as the GSV Eternal Vigilance, a hegemony dreadnought that had been listed as destroyed in the Great Consolidation Wars over 3,000 years ago. According to the historical records, the Eternal Vigilance was the flagship of the hegemony's 7th Fleet during the final battles against the Void Hunters, Kim continued. It was reported destroyed with all hands when the Hunters made their last assault on the hegemony core worlds. Rivera studied the crew manifest that continued to scroll across the screen. Over 15,000 names representing dozens of species, many of which were now extinct. The ship's complement included hegemony warriors, Zephyrian energy techs, architect observers, and representatives from species that had vanished during the dark centuries following the Void Hunter Wars. Sir, there's something else, Kim said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The transmission includes a request for assistance, specifically from human vessels. It mentions that human tactical approaches and adaptability would be particularly valuable for the rescue operation. Rivera froneth. That's impossible. This ship has been drifting for 3,000 years. There's no way it could have information about human capabilities. The answer came in the form of another data burst from the Eternal Vigilance. The ship's artificial intelligence, still functioning after millennia of drift, had been monitoring galactic communications. It had observed the recent council session, analyzed the debates about human capabilities, and concluded that humanity's unconventional approaches made them the most suitable species to attempt a rescue operation. The ship's AI is requesting permission to transmit complete technical specifications for hegemony Dreadnought-class vessels, Kim reported. It states that the rescue operation will require modifications to our ships that can only be made with complete understanding of the Dreadnought systems. Rivera made his decision quickly. Transmit acceptance of the technical data and begin immediate preparations for a rescue mission. Contact Fleet Command and request authorization for Operation Historical Recovery. As the data from the Eternal Vigilance began flowing into Prometheus Station's computers, Rivera realized the magnitude of what they were attempting. The Dreadnought was nearly 50 kilometers long, carried advanced weapon systems that current galactic civilizations could barely understand, and contained technologies that had been lost for millennia. More importantly, if the crew manifest was accurate, there were still over 8,000 survivors in stasis pods scattered throughout the ship. They represented a living link to galactic history that had been thought lost forever. The response from Fleet Command came faster than Rivera had expected. Admiral Chun, no relation to the ambassador, appeared on the main screen with the authorization codes already displayed behind her. Captain Rivera, you have full authorization for historical recovery. We're dispatching the carrier group Determination and the support fleet from Kepler Station. You'll have 15 ships and the best rescue specialists in the fleet. Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Captain, I need you to understand the political implications of this mission. The Galactic Council just finished classifying us as a threat, and now we're about to attempt a rescue operation involving technology and personnel that predate their current governmental structure. We need this to succeed perfectly. Rivera nodded. Understood, Admiral. We won't let them down. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation. The human fleet assembled at the coordinates transmitted by the Eternal Vigilance's AI moved with an efficiency that had become their trademark. Engineers studied the transmitted technical specifications and developed modification plans for their ship's docking systems. Medical teams prepared for the unique challenge of reviving beings who had been in stasis for millennia. Tactical officers analyzed the Dreadnought's defensive systems to determine the safest approach vectors. When the Eternal Vigilance finally appeared on their sensors, even veterans who had seen the largest vessels in the Galactic Fleet were stunned into silence. The ancient Dreadnought dwarfed their entire task force, its hull scarred by countless battles and pitted by millennia of cosmic radiation. "My God," whispered Commander Torres, Rivera's tactical officer. "It's like looking at a mountain that learned to fly." The ship's condition was worse than the transmissions had indicated. Massive sections of the hull had been compromised, several of the main engines were completely destroyed, and radiation leakage from the power core created hazardous zones throughout the vessel. "Captain," Kim reported, "the AI is transmitting updated rescue priorities. It's identified 847 critical personnel in the primary stasis banks who need immediate evacuation. The secondary banks contain another 7,203 survivors, but their pods are in more stable condition." Rivera studied the tactical display showing the Dreadnought's internal structure. "What about the crew in the damaged sections?" The AI reports that stasis pods in sections 7 through 12 were compromised during the original battle. "Those crew members..." Kim's voice trailed off. Rivera closed his eyes briefly, acknowledging the reality of ancient sacrifices. "Understood. Focus on the survivors we can save. What's our approach strategy?" The technical modifications that the human engineers had developed proved crucial. The Eternal Vigilance's docking bays were designed for ships that used different power coupling systems and atmospheric standards. The human fleet had modified their shuttles and support vessels to interface with the ancient systems, allowing them to establish stable connections to the Dreadnought. As the rescue operation began, something remarkable happened. The Eternal Vigilance's AI, which had been dormant for most of the past 3 millennia, began actively assisting the rescue effort. It rerouted power to critical systems, activated emergency life support in areas where human teams were working, and provided real-time guidance through the ship's labyrinthine corridors. The first stasis pod they successfully retrieved contained a hegemony officer whose species had been considered extinct for over 2,000 years. As the medical team worked to safely revive the ancient warrior, Rivera couldn't help but reflect on the historical significance of the moment. "Captain," Kim called from the communication station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're demanding an explanation for our presence in this sector." Rivera looked at the tactical display, showing his rescue teams scattered throughout the ancient Dreadnought. "Tell them we're conducting a humanitarian rescue operation in accordance with standard galactic protocol." The response came back immediately. They're stating that human vessels are restricted from independent operations under Resolution 2847. We're ordered to cease current activities and report to the nearest council station. Rivera felt anger building in his chest. "Commander Kim, please transmit the crew manifest from the Eternal Vigilance to the council. Include the historical significance documentation and the current status of rescue operations." As the data transmitted to the council, Rivera returned his attention to the rescue operation. His teams had successfully retrieved over 300 survivors from the primary stasis banks and were making steady progress through the secondary sections. The breakthrough came when they reached the ship's command center. The Eternal Vigilance's AI had maintained complete historical records of the Void Hunter Wars, including tactical analyses of battles that had shaped galactic civilization for the next 3 millennia. Commander Torres studied the data with growing excitement. "Captain, this information fills in massive gaps in galactic military history. The strategies the hegemony used to defeat the Void Hunters, the technologies they developed, the alliances they forged, it's all here. More importantly, the records included detailed information about dozens of species that had participated in the ancient wars, but had since been forgotten by galactic historians. The crew of the Eternal Vigilance represented genetic and cultural diversity that current galactic civilization had assumed was lost forever. As the rescue operation continued, Rivera received another transmission from the Galactic Council. This time, the tone had changed significantly. Ambassador Thexani appeared on the screen, her crystalline features reflecting what might have been embarrassment. "Captain Rivera, the Council has reviewed the information you transmitted regarding the Eternal Vigilance. We had no knowledge that such a vessel still existed. Rivera kept his expression carefully neutral. The rescue operation is proceeding according to standard humanitarian protocols, Ambassador. We estimate another 12 hours to complete evacuation of all surviving crew members. Captain, we need to discuss the implications of this discovery. The Eternal Vigilance and its crew represent historical resources that belong to the entire galactic community. The Council needs to determine proper protocols for handling such a significant discovery. Rivera looked at his tactical display, where human rescue teams continued their methodical evacuation of ancient heroes. Ambassador, with respect, the proper protocol for handling survivors of a shipwreck is to rescue them first and handle the political implications afterward. The conversation that followed was interrupted by an urgent alert from the sensor station. Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Multiple vessels, unknown configuration, heading directly for our position. The tactical display updated to show a fleet of ships unlike anything in current galactic databases. Their design was sleek, predatory, and somehow familiar to anyone who had studied ancient military history. "My God," whispered Torres. Those configurations match the historical descriptions of Void Hunter assault vessels. The Eternal Vigilance's AI immediately transmitted a priority alert. Warning, Void Hunter reconnaissance force detected. Estimate 1.2 hours to weapons range. Recommend immediate tactical preparations. Rivera felt the weight of 3,000 years of galactic history settling on his shoulders. The Void Hunters, the ancient enemy that had driven galactic civilization to the brink of extinction, were returning. And the only forces in position to respond were a human rescue fleet and the crew of an ancient dreadnought that had been fighting this war for millennia. All ships, this is Captain Rivera. Transition from rescue operations to combat readiness. Continue evacuation of critical personnel while preparing for hostile contact. He turned to his communications officer. Kim, transmit all available data about the Void Hunters to Fleet Command and the Galactic Council. Include tactical analyses from the Eternal Vigilance's historical records. As his fleet prepared for a battle against an enemy that had been dormant for 3,000 years, Rivera realized that the rescue operation had become something far more significant. They weren't just saving the crew of an ancient ship. They were about to reunite the galaxy's greatest warriors with an enemy they had never stopped fighting. The Eternal Vigilance, despite its damaged condition, began powering up weapons systems that hadn't been fired in millennia. Its ancient crew, many now revived and taking emergency stations, prepared to resume a war that they had never truly ended. And in the space between the advancing enemy and the inhabited systems beyond, a human fleet found itself in the position of defending galactic civilization alongside heroes from an age when such battles had nearly destroyed the galaxy itself. The battle began with silence. Captain Rivera watched the tactical displays as the Void Hunter fleet approached with the methodical precision of a species that had perfected warfare across countless millennia. Their ships moved in formations that seemed to flow like liquid death through space, each vessel perfectly positioned to support the others in patterns that spoke of an intelligence that viewed war as an art form. Void Hunter vessels entering weapons range in 47 minutes, reported Commander Torres. Energy signatures suggest they're carrying weapons technology that predates anything in our current databases. The Eternal Vigilance hung in space like a wounded giant, its ancient hull scarred by battles that had become legend. Despite the damage it had sustained over 3,000 years of drift, the Dreadnought's weapons systems were coming online with the slow, inevitable power of a sleeping god awakening. Captain, came a transmission from the ancient ship. This is Admiral Caxthal of the Hegemony 7th Fleet. I have resumed command of the Eternal Vigilance. Rivera looked at the figure that appeared on his screen and felt a chill of recognition. Admiral Caxthal was a legend, a hegemony commander whose tactical brilliance had become the subject of military academies throughout the galaxy. The being that had just introduced itself had been considered dead for 3,000 years. Yet here it stood on the bridge of its ancient flagship, preparing to resume a war that had never truly ended. "Admiral," Rivera replied formally. "Captain Rivera of the human vessel Prometheus. We stand ready to support your operations." Caxthol's 4 eyes studied Rivera with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the communication screen. "Human, I have been monitoring your species development through the ship's intelligence systems. Your tactical approaches are unconventional." "So we've been told, sir." "Good." Caxthol's mandibles clicked in what Rivera hoped was approval. "Conventional tactics will not serve us well against the Void Hunters. They have had 3,000 years to adapt to the strategies that defeated them before." As if summoned by the mention of their name, the Void Hunter fleet suddenly accelerated, their ships moving with impossible grace through the gravitational fields of the local star system. What had been a methodical approach became a predatory rush toward their prey. "They know," Caxthol transmitted grimly. "They have detected the Eternal Vigilance's power signature. The Hunters remember this ship, Captain Rivera. We were their greatest opposition during the last war." The first exchange of fire came when the Void Hunter fleet was still at extreme range. Beams of energy that bent space itself lanced out from their ships, striking with precision that should have been impossible across such distances. The human destroyer Defiance took a direct hit that penetrated its shields like they were made of paper. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Rivera commanded. "Do not attempt to match their range. Close to medium distance, and use mobility to avoid their targeting systems." The human fleet scattered into the attack patterns that had served them well during the border conflicts, using their ships' superior maneuverability to avoid the devastating long-range attacks. But Rivera could see that conventional tactics would not be enough. The Void Hunters were adapting to their movements with frightening speed. "Admiral Caxthol," Rivera transmitted, "we need to coordinate our attacks. Our ships are faster and more maneuverable, but your Dreadnought has the firepower to penetrate their defenses." "Agreed, Captain. I propose a variation of the strategy that was effective against them during the Battle of the Twin Suns. Your vessels will create targeting opportunities while the Eternal Vigilance provides concentrated fire support." What followed was a demonstration of tactical coordination that had never been attempted in galactic history. Human ships, with their chaotic, improvisational fighting style, worked in perfect harmony with the ancient Dreadnought's methodical, overwhelming firepower. The Void Hunters, who had expected to face either scattered human vessels or a single ancient enemy, found themselves confronting something they had never encountered: a hybrid fighting force that combined the aggressive adaptability of humanity with the accumulated tactical wisdom of the greatest military civilization in galactic history. The first Void Hunter ship fell to concentrated fire from the Eternal Vigilance after the human frigate Determination created a targeting opportunity by executing a maneuver that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. The ancient enemy's ship exploded in a burst of energy that sent cascades of radiation across the battlefield. "Remarkable," Admiral Caxthol transmitted. "Captain Rivera, your pilots are attempting maneuvers that our tactical computers classify as impossible." "Human pilots don't always believe what computers tell them is impossible, sir," Rivera replied as he watched Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim thread her fighter through a gap in the enemy formation that existed for less than 3 seconds. The battle continued with an intensity that tested the limits of both human ingenuity and ancient hegemony engineering. Void Hunter ships that had survived the original wars found themselves facing tactics that had never existed when they were last active. Human vessels that had been designed for conflicts with other galactic species discovered that they were fighting an enemy that treated war as a fundamental force of nature. It was Commander Torres who identified the pattern that would determine the battle's outcome. "Captain, I'm detecting a coordination node in the Void Hunter formation. That large vessel in their center isn't just a command ship. It's actively controlling the tactical responses of their entire fleet." Rivera studied the tactical display and immediately understood the implications. "If we could disrupt that node, Their individual ships will have to rely on local tactical systems, Admiral Caxthal concluded. Systems that were designed for the last war, not for fighting combined human and hegemony forces. The attack on the coordination node required every ship in the combined fleet to execute their roles with perfect timing. Human vessels would penetrate the Void Hunter defensive screen using maneuvers that prioritize speed and unpredictability over conventional tactical wisdom. The Eternal Vigilance would provide covering fire and deliver the killing blow once the human ships had created the necessary opening. All ships, this is Captain Rivera. Execute Pattern Omega in 30 seconds. Remember, we only get one chance at this. The attack began with the human destroyer Resilience executing a micro-jump that placed it directly behind the Void Hunter formation. The maneuver should have been impossible, jumping to hyperspace and returning to normal space within the gravitational field of a star required navigation precision that exceeded the capabilities of most galactic species. The Void Hunters, caught completely off guard by the appearance of an enemy ship in what they had considered a secure zone, redirected their defensive fire to address the new threat. This created exactly the opening that Admiral Caxthal had been waiting for. The Eternal Vigilance's main batteries fired in sequence, each shot precisely calibrated to penetrate the weakened sections of the coordination node's defensive screen. The ancient Dreadnought's weapons, designed to fight enemies that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization, proved devastatingly effective against targets that had remained unchanged for 3 millennia. The Void Hunter coordination node exploded with such violence that the shock wave disabled 3 of their nearest ships. Suddenly, the predatory precision of their fleet formation dissolved into individual ships fighting according to tactical programs that were 3,000 years out of date. All ships, press the attack, Rivera commanded. They're fighting the last war now. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of how warfare had evolved during the Void Hunter's long absence. Human tactical flexibility, combined with the overwhelming firepower of the Eternal Vigilance, systematically dismantled an enemy fleet that had expected to face the same civilizations they had fought millennia ago. When the last Void Hunter ship was destroyed, the silence that followed was profound. Rivera found himself staring at a battlefield where the impossible had been achieved. Humanity and the ancient hegemony had worked together to defeat an enemy that had once brought galactic civilization to the edge of extinction. Captain Rivera, Admiral Caxthal transmitted, I must commend your species on their tactical innovation. The maneuvers your ships executed during this engagement would have been impossible for the galactic navies of my era. Before Rivera could respond, his communications array lit up with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Word of the battle was spreading through the galactic networks with unprecedented speed. The first transmission came from Ambassador Thexani of the Galactic Council. Her crystalline features showed an expression that Rivera had never seen before, something that might have been humility. Captain Rivera, the Council has been monitoring the battle through long-range sensors. We need to speak with you urgently. Within hours, representatives from every major galactic power were requesting permission to visit the battle site. The implications of what had happened were too significant to ignore. Humanity, the species that had been declared a threat just days before, had just saved galactic civilization from an enemy that predated current governmental structures. More importantly, they had done it in partnership with the crew of the Eternal Vigilance, heroes from an age when such cooperation between species had been the foundation of galactic defense. Admiral Caxthal requested a private communication with Rivera as the rescue operations concluded, and the ancient crew prepared to integrate with modern galactic society. Captain, I've been reviewing the records of the recent council session that classified your species as a threat. I find myself perplexed by their reasoning. Rivera chose his words carefully. Admiral, the council was concerned about humanity's rapid development and unconventional approaches to galactic integration. Caxthal's 4 eyes fixed on Rivera with an intensity that spoke of ancient wisdom. Captain, during the original Void Hunter Wars, it was precisely such unconventional approaches that allowed galactic civilization to survive. The species that adapted fastest, that found new solutions to impossible problems, were the ones that saved us all. The ancient admiral paused, accessing memories that span millennia. The hegemony fell because it became too rigid, too dependent on established protocols. The species that survived and thrived were those that retained the ability to change, to adapt, to find new ways of thinking about old problems. Rivera began to understand the deeper implications of what Caxthal was saying. Sir, are you suggesting that humanity's perceived unpredictability is actually an asset? Caxthal completed. A crucial asset that galactic civilization has been missing for 3,000 years. The Void Hunters returned expecting to face the same static defenses that they overcame before. They never anticipated an enemy that could adapt and evolve during the course of a single battle. When the formal debriefing session convened on Nexus Prime 3 days later, the same chamber that had declared humanity a threat was filled with a very different energy. The crew of the Eternal Vigilance sat alongside human officers, sharing tactical analyses and historical perspectives that painted a completely different picture of galactic defense needs. Ambassador Chun found herself in the unusual position of presenting evidence rather than defending against accusations. The battle records spoke for themselves. Human tactical innovation had been the crucial factor in defeating an enemy that conventional galactic forces might not have been able to stop. The evidence is clear. Admiral Caxthal stated formally to the assembled council. The species you have classified as a threat possesses exactly the capabilities that galactic civilization needs to defend against unconventional enemies. Their adaptability, their tactical innovation, their willingness to attempt solutions that others consider impossible. These are not threats to galactic stability. They are essential components of galactic defense. The vote to rescind Resolution 2847 was unanimous. But more than political classifications had changed. The partnership between humanity and the survivors of the Eternal Vigilance had demonstrated something that the galaxy had forgotten during its long peace. That strength came not from rigid adherence to established patterns, but from the ability to adapt, evolve, and find new solutions when old ones proved insufficient. As Rivera prepared to return to human space with his fleet, he received a final transmission from Admiral Caxthal. Captain, the crew of the Eternal Vigilance has voted to request assignment to joint operations with human forces. We believe that our combined capabilities represent the future of galactic defense. Rivera looked out at the stars where new alliances were being forged between species separated by millennia, united by the shared understanding that survival sometimes required the courage to abandon old assumptions and embrace new possibilities. The galaxy had declared humanity a threat, but the fallen Dreadnought and its ancient crew had reminded them of a fundamental truth. Sometimes the greatest threats to established order were also the greatest hopes for continued survival. In the end, it wasn't humanity that had been contained by galactic civilization. It was galactic civilization that had been expanded by humanity's refusal to accept that some problems were simply unsolvable.